Sri Lanka, a tropical island in Southeast Asia, is home to 20,927,915 people as of Tuesday, March 13, 2018. It makes up 0.27% of the total world population, with a population density of 865 people per mile squared. The median age is 32.7 years old. These demographics rank Sri Lanka as the 58th most populated nation. The dominant ethnic group is Sinhalese, making up 74.8% of the population, with Tamil coming in second at 11.2% of the population. The majority of the population is Theravada Buddhist, and a small fraction practice Islam, which was introduced to Sri Lanka through trade. Sri Lanka's population has shifted from a rapid growth model in 1950 to a much more stable growth model in 2016. High birth rates combined with low death rates in 1950, resulting in a yearly change of almost 2%. However, increased use of contraceptives, among other factors, have led to a yearly population growth rate of just 0.41% in 2016. This trend is expected to continue, with the population pyramid for 2050 showing a negative growth rate. Population forecasts predict that the yearly percent change will decline to just 0.35% by 2020 and negative 0.35% by 2050. Sri Lanka's population trend is quite different from that of Tanzania, which is currently experiencing rapid growth. Tanzania is forecasted to increase their yearly growth rate to 3% by just 2020, whereas Sri Lanka's will be approximately 1/9 of that. Sri Lanka's trend will result in a larger middle-aged population and a much smaller younger population, and Tanzania's trend will produce the opposite. This may strain the economy as there will be far fewer adults to comprise the workforce, but more children, which will strain resources. Additionally, more money will go towards education and less towards resources for the elderly. Sri Lanka's trend puts them on the same track as Japan, whose population is currently declining by 0.23%. Sri Lanka's predicted population pyramid in 2050 closely resembles Japan's pyramid in 2017. While Japan's decreasing population benefits the environment and relieves the strain on resources, it has also led to cultural challenges. Schools are struggling to fill their classes simply because there are so few kids. Japan and Sri Lanka are experiencing population decline for different reasons. Japan, because women are more often choosing to put their families on hold to pursue a career, and Sri Lanka because of decreasing fertility and increased contraceptive use. Regardless of the reason, both countries are following similar population trends. If Sri Lanka continues on this path, they can expect similar problems to those experienced in Japan. As the population ages, funds will be diverted from education to healthcare for the elderly. Furthermore, as the smaller, younger generations become adults, there will be far fewer people to participate in the workforce. Retirement age may increase, with the mean age of the labor force increasing proportionally. Sri Lanka also has a significant amount of illegal child labor, which may worsen as the population ages. A smaller young population may mean less funding for services that benefit children, like education. If children don't have access to education, they may turn to dangerous labor instead.
Sri Lanka, an emblem of beauty, tradition, and culture, has a rich environmental history. For more than a century, this country has experienced one of the most dramatic civil wars in the Asiatic continent. From 1983 to 2001, the army has fought against the Tamil people. The conflict which has caused millions of deaths. This country, Sri Lanka, the so-called India's teardrop, in the past few years has tried to move past all the suffering caused by the civil war and the tsunami of 2004 that left nearly 40,000 deaths. On one hand, Sri Lanka has seen a favorable increase in the economy, combined with a literacy rate that is now over 90%. On the other hand, the country has seen the emergence of major socio-economic conflicts. With war and natural disasters left in the past, the country now has to face a new crisis, the conflict between the Buddhist majority and the Muslim minority. Mutual accusations, never suppressed grievances, Latin disagreements, and socio-economic tensions. The fights and disputes that started between the two religious communities do not seem to be related to a particular event, but rather to constantly increasing tensions, resulting from culture and socio-economic division. The Kandy district seems to be the epicenter of the conflict, about 150 kilometers from the capital, Colombo. This district is where the Buddhist and the Muslim conflicts began, with each community blaming the other to have started the fight. In the last few years, the extremist group of the Sinhala Buddhists has targeted the Tamil community, about 13% of the population, and the Muslim community, about 10% of the population, in the northeast part of the country, accusing them of religious proselytism. Encouraged by ultranational Buddhist monks like Ambiti Swana, who was sighted at Kandy just hours before the conflict started. The extremist branches have repeatedly attacked the local minorities in episodes of violence. These attacks are very similar to what occurred in Kandy. The state authorities have not intervened to ensure the security of the Muslim or the Hindu, seen by the Sinhalese Buddhist extremists as parasitic entities in Sri Lanka that is considered to be the home of the Sinhala and of the Buddhism. The most recent sources have reported that the body of a Muslim man was found in critical conditions inside the burning home. This event clearly shows how the hate between the Buddhist majority and the Muslim can provoke new and more violent conflicts in the future. These recent disputes have alarmed the local and the international public, since there is a risk that a major conflict could start at any moment. At this point, a violent attack from the Muslim population is very possible, taking into consideration the devastation that have occurred during the last few days.
Sri Lanka is currently experiencing a growth in the economy with a slightly larger working age population than the elderly or children. However, Sri Lanka is unable to fully take advantage of this human resource due to several issues, including a large informal sector and high unemployment, specifically female unemployment. Only 56% of the working age population are employed, driven by low labor force participation and high unemployment rates among women and youth. The elderly population is also continuing to grow, with an expected growth rate of 12.5% to 16.7% by the year 2020. The steadily aging population is estimated to peak by 2041. Unlike the working class, there is no way to capitalize on the elderly. An aging population presents significant social protection challenges for vulnerable groups, particularly low-income families that need money to support the elderly. As a greater portion of the population reaches retirement, the government must allocate more funds to meet their health and welfare needs. There is limited funding for the public investment activities and for economic prosperity. Another socio-economic challenge associated with the aging population is the strain put on the national health system and national health care budget. Old age illnesses such as Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular diseases, chronic cancer, arthritic conditions, and osteoporosis, as well as physical disabilities, are expected to rise in the future in Sri Lanka. All these factors can be considered threats to the future economic status of the country. The poster I have created depicts the elderly's concerns with the aging population and high levels of unemployment in the middle class. The cartoon depicts a message being sent from the elderly in Sri Lanka to the government. It highlights the issues of the aging population, unemployment, and migration of the youth. Outmigration in Sri Lanka is being driven by low per capita income, high inflation, and lack of access of resources. So in the cartoon, there's a bunch of old people outside a retirement home and a young man. The young man asks, "Why are you leaving the retirement home?" She responds, "There's no longer room here. The elderly population is growing and 50% in the middle age are unemployed. There are not enough young people employed or even here to support us financially and physically." They ask him, "Where are you going, young man?" He responds, "I am migrating to find work in another country." The irony of the cartoon is that, oh my god. The problem is the youth and elderly share the same goal, but nothing is going to be changed without government interference. The youth and middle age being employed benefits everyone. If there are more jobs and more young people are employed, they will have an income and not need to migrate out of the country for work. The economy will be boosted, and there will be more people in the country paying taxes that will fund programs for the elderly. Sri Lanka, such as the capital and Colombo, are extremely dense. With high populations, specifically in the western province, urban areas are considered overpopulated. Current environmental issues in Sri Lanka include large-scale logging of forests and degradation of mangroves, coral reefs, and soil. Industrialization and population growth are major drivers of these environmental issues. Due to deforestation in Sri Lanka, the size of land covered by natural forests decreased from 80% in 1820 to 43% in 1948. Because deforestation is responsible for increased greenhouse gas emissions, it has a negative effect on the health of citizens inhabiting Sri Lanka. These environmental problems have deteriorated because of a high population growth and the increased industrialization in Sri Lanka since the 1980s. A lack of public awareness of the issues intensified the problems. However, the government cares deeply about the issue and is trying to increase awareness for the sake of the environment and human health. This drawing depicts a message from the government of Sri Lanka to its people about the environmental issues caused by overpopulation. It's a hand holding a Polaroid of a forest over top a city to show what the city once was before it was urbanized.
Unlike the nations that neighbor the island of Sri Lanka, the population of Sri Lanka is not growing as rapidly. While the population growth rate in India is 7.1% annual change, Sri Lanka is only 1.1% annual change. That 1.1% is even less than the population growth rate of the United States, which is 1.7% annual change. Not only is the annual change of Sri Lanka surprisingly low, but it has been on the decline since 1953, when the growth rate was a staggering 2.8%. The explanation for this decline? The Sri Lankan government's dedication to population control. The efforts began when a group of young men and women came together and created a non-governmental organization in 1953, the Family Planning Association of Sri Lanka. When this NGO was provided with a small government grant in 1954, they were able to conduct family planning clinics in government hospitals in major towns such as Colombo, Kandy, and Gale. Despite the achievements of the Family Planning Association of Sri Lanka, the government recognized there was still a lot of work to be done to control the population. In 1960, the unemployment rate reached a staggering 10%. This put a great deal of pressure on the government to enact real policy change. Therefore, in 1965, the government made the decision to include family planning as part of the National Maternal and Child Health Care Program. But rapid birth rates in the 1950s counteracted this initiative, and unemployment rates continued to rise well into the 1970s, reaching as high as 20%. In 1972, the Sri Lankan government created and released their 5-year plan, which revealed their hope to decline the population growth rate so the population did not become 27 million by the year 2000, as their growth rate had projected. To achieve their aims, the government knew they had to use a hands-on approach to directly impact their constituents. But as the government lacked the funds to create such programs, they signed a project agreement with the United Nations Population Fund in 1973. With money from the fund, Sri Lanka was able to create a total of 11 projects that ranged everywhere from population education in schools to education and family planning in the urban sector and in states, teaching of population dynamics and family planning in medical schools, demographic training and research, family health and education, etc. Within 5 years of their plan, the government saw significant change as a result of their 11 projects, but wanted to further continue their efforts. For the best interest of the nation, in 1980, the government funded voluntary sterilizations throughout the country to fertile women between the ages of 30 and 49. As of thousands of women participated in this effort, not only did the rate of population growth decline to 1.3% by 1987, but the contraceptive rate rose to 62%. Birth control movements had an enormous impact on the overall population. By the early 2000s, the country had reached the final phase of its demographic transition and had transformed the population from its original pyramid shape into a barrel shape. Although the population rate in 1972 projected a population of 27 million by the year 2000, the actual population in 2000 was just 18 million. The unemployment rate that was once 20% was now below 4%. These results prove how the hard work and continuation of these programs by the Sri Lankan government are very successful and thus should serve as a model for other nations to follow in the future. Despite their own economic hardships, Sri Lanka had a high growth rate, overcame a high growth rate by providing the birth control their constituents needed as well as educating them. Interestingly enough, cultural differences are now the new reason why Sri Lanka is having issues controlling its population. The Sinhala Buddhists have targeted Tamil and Muslim communities, resulting in unwanted violence. The government has worked hard to control population rates and reduce the unemployment rate, but is struggling to address an issue on this level. With a small government budget, Sri Lanka lacks the resources to control riots and the policies to resolve the conflicts between the groups. Sri Lanka is requesting military assistance in order to resolve the conflicts that exist between the two groups and end the violence. The government believes that if it receives military assistance of some kind, Sinhala Buddhists will get the message that if they continue to act with violence towards the Tahal and Muslim communities, they will face consequences. Thank you for your time.